Hi, welcome to my video featuring Felix, who's supposed to be napping, and the family dog, waiting for him to drop his lunch. My name's Misha and I'm an aspiring children's illustrator based in Adelaide, Australia. Yeah! I am a mixed media artist, primarily working in watercolor and pencils, and I also dabble in textile work with embroidery and painting jackets, so you most likely will see some of my upcycled fashion projects on this channel. Yeah. The purpose of this channel is going to be to document my artistic journey, share my experimentations with different mediums, my thoughts on them, and every now and then, like this video, I'll be reviewing. I'll be reviewing some supplies. Today's video is actually of me swatching the Daniel Smith watercolor dot cards. Consists of 238 colors across 4 sheets divided into the following colors: yellows, oranges, reds, and red violets, violets, blues, blue greens, and greens, neutral greens with earth tones, and finally neutrals along with the Daniel Smith duochrome and iridescent colors. The set ran me 36 Australian dollars, which from what I can tell seems to be the standard price for it. The Daniel Smith dot cards are 238 colours, which isn't their entire colour range as they actually have 260. The dot cards include their 32 Primatex, 5 Mayan, 12 quinacridone colours, 6 cadmium hues, 48 luminescent colours, 20 iridescent, 7 interference, 19 duochrome, the pearlescent shimmer, pearlescent white, and 135 other extra fine colours. Right off the bat, I noticed that they don't actually include any of the pigment information, which is a shame because, well, one, it's useful to know whether a colour is a single pigment or multi-pigment, especially if you like to use watercolours, which are great for mixing. It's one of their biggest qualities. The other... Yep, dropped his lunch. The other reason is that if you work with multiple mediums, it's extremely useful to know the pigments because then you can have some consistency across your palettes and your bodies of work. The paper that this comes on isn't actually the greatest. It feels as though it's student or economy grade. Maybe I'm holding it in my hands, so sorry if you hear rustling. It feels like it's maybe 165 grams. Cold press probably. It's a shame it doesn't come on better paper because these are supposed to be artist quality paints, so you'd hope they come on artist quality paper. Paper can affect the way a pigment lays down a huge amount, whether it granulates, how vivid it is. Yeah. And despite how light-handed I was all throughout this with the water, the paper has still warped by the end of all the swatching. The amount of paint per color also isn't the greatest. It varies a huge amount. Some generous enough to do, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 pieces with it, and others I could barely even get a swatch up. In particular, Opera Pink. I had to really work at that one. Other paints don't seem to work quite as well once they're dried when I wanted to swatch it. The Cobalt Violet was one of them. I really had to work at that one, but most of them that I had trouble with were the duochromes and the interference colors. Now, I imagine that these are actually glazing colors and will work much better from the tube, so that could be part of it, not the... Blair. Or it could always just be user error. Before I delve into pigment properties, I'm going to first go over some of the reasons as to why you'd actually want to buy a dot card in the first place. The first and I'd say most obvious reason is so that you can test out the colours at a fraction of the cost that it would be to buy the tubes individually. It's good to test colours on the paper you typically use because, as I mentioned before, paper affects paint behaviour a huge amount. Sorry, I'm just grabbing his lunch here. Yeah. But another thing that affects paint behavior a huge amount that I don't see or hear it talked about quite often is what kind of pH level your water has. If it's hard water, it will cause colors that typically don't granulate to granulate a huge amount, pigment to separate from binder. It can even change the hue of some of the colors a little bit. Adelaide, which is where I live, has hugely hard water, so it's definitely something I want to test before I commit to buying an entire tube. But other than that, it's also just handy to have a dot card around so that you have all the pigment information available at a glance. As I said before, they don't include the pigment codes, unfortunately, but they do include the series, which is the cost of the pigment, the light fastness rating, which is the longevity of the color's resistance to fading and huge changes when they're exposed to sunlight. They will range from excellent all the way down to fugitive. Such fugitive color as opera pink, which is actually one of my favorites, but as long as you're not displaying the paint, then it doesn't matter too huge an amount. Sorry, I'm rambling and going off course here. Another thing that it lists is whether or not a color is staining. Staining colors will penetrate the fibers of your paper, which is what gives it that luminous glow that watercolor will often have and people want to achieve. It's actually the white of the paper shining through. And non-staining colors will settle on top of the paper itself, and they will be a lot easier to lift if that's one of the techniques you like to use. Staining colors, it's kind of on the tin. They're going to stain the paper. You're not going to be able to lift it as easily. Another thing is that they tell you whether or not a color is granulating. Now, what makes a color granulating is that paints will either be made up of heavy or light particles. Heavier particles will separate from the water and from the binder, and they'll settle into the tooth of your paper. So if you use rough or cold press paper, then it is going to granulate a lot more, even if it's an already granulating color, and hot press will be a bit more mild, which is something to keep in mind, and smaller, lighter pigment particles will cause it to flow evenly, which will create those smooth washes. What else do they list here? They also list whether or not one of their colors is a Primatech paint. Now, the Daniel Smith Primatech paints are made directly from authentic minerals. I don't know too huge an amount about these paints. I'd have to actually research it a lot more, as I'm not particularly fussed whether the paints I use are made with a synthetic dye or a... Oh, buddy. I'm not too fussed whether they're made with a synthetic dye, as I said, or a pure pigment. The last thing they list is transparency, and oh my god, I'm a goober. It's not the staining property that gives watercolor paints that luminous glow. It's for transparency. Transparency will allow light to come through and reflect against the white of the paper, and opaque colors will block the light, which will result in that thicker, muddier, almost gouache look. Now, if you want to know the pigment codes of your colors and whether or not they're single or multi-pigments, you're actually going to have to look into the brochure, which can be a bit of a drudge, because I'm currently going through it and writing it down onto the dot card, which is taking me a while because it's not in the same order. And as I said before, they have 260 colors, so you have to also work out which colors you actually have, which ones you don't on the dot card. So yeah, it's a bit annoying. But going through these pigments and writing them down, I've noticed that Daniel Smith does not list anywhere. I looked all over the website, everywhere I could. They don't list what pigments they use for the Mayan orange, which is really annoying. To say the least, because you're paying a premium price, so you'd hope that they'd actually be transparent and let you know what pigments they use. But anyway, some of the colors these dot cards don't list are their newer grey range. I'm not sure if they're going to at any point actually release dot cards to let you try them out because they're their specialty colors. And from what I know, if you want to try out any of the specialty colors, you actually have to get it from one of their workshops or the store, like the actual Daniel Smith store, which I think is in Seattle. So that's something to consider, I guess. All in all, if you enjoy watercolors, and you're ready to either take a step up from student grade or you're hoping to try brands and you have the disposable income, I do recommend getting yourself a dot card. It is a good way to try out new paints and the like. In my upcoming video, I'll actually be showing how I used the dot chart and their brochure to pick out some limited colors to create a split pyramid set, if you guys are interested in that. If you want me to do a more in-depth voiceover for that video, then please comment below and let me know. But if you'd rather I'm not just rambling over the top of it like I have been in the last two, also let me know. I do want to make these videos as enjoyable for you guys as I can. Hey, it is 5 a.m. and it's been, I don't know if it's been a day or two since I was doing the voiceover. Self-isolation has made me lose all sense of time. That's not important anyway. I'm rewatching the video and the voiceover, and I don't remember what I was going to say, and honestly, I don't know if I had anything else to say. So I'm just going to be quickly wrapping this up. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be doing a split primary video following up this one, and how I set up the palette, how to get good vibrant mixes along with muted ones, and I'll also show how I make some of my greys, some more neutral than others. I know that sounds odd, but you can get bright greys through the granulation of the pigments. Oh my god, I normally ramble, but this is even worse than usual. This is the only time I have to do it without the kids running around screaming at me. I also was thinking of doing either a plein air painting, which is, how do I explain plein air? Plein air is when you take your supplies outdoors and you paint whatever is in front of you, and it has to be completed whilst outdoors. Or I was going to do another sketchbook spread if you guys would like that. Or a final idea I had was to do one big piece, show you guys how I do it from beginning through to end, with a voiceover explaining each step and my thought process behind it. If you'd be so kind, then comment below which you would prefer. I'm really sorry for how exhausted I sound and for the huge amount of rambling. You'd think I'd write down what I was going to say for this video, but I didn't. I wrote down a few points, I glazed over them, and that's it. And I'm really sorry for how low energy I am. The bubs keep me up all night. Anyway, that's not what this video's about. I really am losing track here. I'll just close this up. Oh my gosh, what was I going to say? This is terrible. I can't be bothered redoing the voiceover though. God, I'm awful. I hope you guys are doing safe. Jesus Christ. I hope you guys are doing okay and that you're all safe and that your loved ones are safe during these times. I'll see you soon. I'll probably upload one video a week, possibly two, depends, most likely on the weekends. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this video, even though I've just talking out my patootie at this point. Alright, later.